Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Silmarillion Film Project. This is session number 29 of season 5. Dave couldn't be here today. 2 weeks ago, he was experiencing side effects of the COVID vaccine, and tonight his wife is experiencing side effects of the COVID vaccine. So the Kale family is getting vaccinated, and but it's all good. So we will miss Dave. He might be able to jump on. We'll see if he joins us in a bit. But in any case, I have with me this evening Marie Prosser and Nick Palazzo from our writing room. And we are going to be talking tonight about the culture of the Edain. We're going to be sort of looking, doing a little bit more sort of world building, thinking about some of the like kind of big picture stuff with the men and the migration of the men over the course of this season, and also thinking in some more kind of nitty gritty terms about what things should kind of look like. We want to make sure we have kind of clear pictures in our heads about the sort of the nature of the cultures of these, you know, both, because we have essentially not just 3 different human cultures, but 6 different human cultures in a sense, because both of them have a kind of a beginning and an end point. Both of them, all 3 of them have a beginning and end point, and are somewhat dynamic. So we want to kind of think all of that through so we can have clear pictures in our heads as we continue on into towards the second half of the season here, as we'll be doing a bunch of new episodes in a row after this. But first, just a few quick announcements, as always. First, just to remind folks about Signum Academy clubs, which have been going strong. It's been fun. My own son has joined clubs, and he's been learning Old English, which he's been really enjoying. It was really fun to hear my son reading Cadman's hymn, which was cool. So anyway, lots of really fun stuff going on our clubs program. And of course, we are accepted in the Learn Everywhere program in New Hampshire. So New Hampshire high school kids can get school credit for Signum Academy clubs, which is pretty awesome. So anyway, I encourage you guys to look into that, signumuniversity.org/academy. And then Mythmoot 8. Of course, the big news about Mythmoot 8 is that we are doing an in-person gathering. We're going to be doing a hybrid experience. So for those who can make it, we're going to be, here I'm like, my computer is moving ahead already. For those who can make it, we're going to be in Leesburg, Virginia at our normal venue at the National Conference Center. And for those of you who can attend only digitally, we will be working hard to integrate you as fully as possible. There are the two different digital registrations. There's Mootcast for those who just want to be able to pop into the actual sessions, the talks. And you'll also, of course, and very importantly, get an archive of all of the talks for the whole conference. So if you this is best, especially for people who are not going to be able to be there all weekend, right? If you can't be there synchronously, then you can go back and listen to those at any time. And then Moot Hub is our digital option for folks who really do want to be part of the immersive Moot experience for the whole weekend, but can't make it physically down to Leesburg with us. So sign up for Moot Hub for that, and we will involve you in everything from the events and the sort of special side events to conversations in the hallway. So that'll be pretty cool. And then of course we have the in-person options, and you can sign up for like 1 day, multiple days, the whole weekend. It's pretty flexible. So go to signumuniversity.org/mythmoot, and you can see all the options there. If you have previously signed up for Moot Hub, you should have received an email giving you links to upgrade if you would like to upgrade to the in-person version. So be on the lookout for that. Next, we have a script discussion for episode 12. You guys are chugging right along, starting to do the battle, right? Episode 12 is battle episode 1, right? So, and so that's going to be happening on Sunday, May 2nd at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join them on twitch.tv/signumu, or you can find the GoToWebinar link for that. Is the GoToWebinar link available on the site, or is it just Twitch that people tune in for that?
There is a GoToWebinar link, and people can contact Nick for that.
Great. Excellent. Very good. And of course, feel free to contribute thoughts and ideas and discussions if you have opinions about the Battle of Sudden Flame. This is an excellent time to voice them there. And
I'm
then
sure nobody has opinions.
No, I'm sure nobody has opinions. Exactly. Yeah, it's unlikely. But in the unlikely event anyone does, now would be a good time to voice them. And then finally, casting nominations are opening soon for Season 5. We're going to be doing Season 5 casting. We're getting ready, gearing up for doing that. So if you have ideas, of course, we're going to be casting a lot of humans in this season. And I remember bunches of times in the previous 4 seasons when particular actors or actresses were under discussion and we were saying, no, we really need to wait until we get to the humans for some of these people. So it's going to be, I remember last season in particular, it was like, with a few notable exceptions, it was a little like odds and ends-ish, because we had like mostly elves that we had already cast from previous seasons. So the new characters who needed to be cast last season was a comparatively small and kind of miscellaneous group, right? But this season we have a very large group, not only all those humans, but also Miglin as well, which will be a fun casting, I know. So anyway, okay. That is also the other thing that's coming up. So Marie, they can go to the casting thread in season 5 on the discussion boards for that. Okay, cool. Excellent.
Yeah,
all right.
So, Hakan will be opening up a nominations form for that shortly. So keep your eyes open.
Good. Cool. Very good. All right. So this is a map of the migrations of the humans as we have determined them. This is, of course, not canon. We've made some changes here, but this is the way. So we wanted to start off with this sort of overview, right? And it's interesting because like the straightest but most difficult path was like the path that is shortest is also the one that's most difficult by the Haladin from their battle here at the beginning, right down by the River Ascar and the River Galleon, and then up where they lingered for several months, which seemed to them long, but seemed to Thingol short outside of Doriath over here. And then their rather rash trip through Nandan Gortheb, and then down finally to Amon Obo, where they encounter Tevildo. And I just love Haleth wearing the pelt of Tevildo. It's like kind of hardcore, right? To have like one of our characters wearing the skin of one of our earlier characters, who's been a character for several seasons. He's been around for a long time. That's kind of hardcore.
Right. This is a choice that shows up in Peter Jackson's films among the orcs. They seem to scavenge the bodies of their foes and adorn themselves with body parts. You wouldn't expect it among the heroes of the story necessarily, but for Haleth, we can make an exception. Yeah.
No, I mean, it seems to me totally in keeping with her character. I couldn't see her. And it's actually by itself, isn't it? Kind of an interesting little glimpse. I mean, wouldn't that be a bit of a human elf difference as well? Like the elves themselves would, I think, have even creatures like Tevildo or Shelob or something like that, right? They would have a different context for them. To the humans, they're just monsters, right? They're just great beasts who may be, like Tevildo can talk, which makes him a worse monster, right? A more dangerous monster and a more evil monster, but a monster nevertheless, right? A foe who has been overcome, and not a foe that she's going to even consider. I mean, she wouldn't think twice about, skinning an animal that she hunted and killed, and wearing its pelt, right? But of course, the elves, especially the Noldor, coming from Valinor, right? I mean, would have some kind of sense that these are not just like normal animals, right? That they're there's Ainur involvement in these creatures, right? And that even though they have become twisted and evil, they maybe should be. But so it's interesting. But of course, we're also going to be working up towards Baron and Luthien, right? I mean, Luthien's going to wear somebody's pelt too. So.
Right. The question is how far to take that restriction and be like, well, only humans would do that.
Because Aradel.
Yeah, so in season 4, we had Aradel have a white cloak that she got as a gift from the Sons of Feanor.
Right.
Who had been out hunting Tevildo's cats.
Right.
So we've already had a character wear one of the cat's pelts, because that's the cloak that she wears to Gondolin, and then it's her signature item.
Right, right.
Yeah. So we did discuss that, because the distinction is kind of like in C.S. Lewis's Silver Chair, where you have the talking beasts, and you don't hunt talking beasts if you're a Narnian. Like, that's just not a thing that is done.
Right.
So, whereas if you're a giant, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Right.
Of course, giants have no qualms about eating humans either.
Humans are marsh wiggles too, right? Exactly. Right. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. They're on the menu. So that distinction between how you view others, are they considered completely other and a monster, even if they can speak and are clearly sentient, or are they considered in some way like you and therefore should be treated with some dignity and respect, even if an enemy?
Right, exactly. I mean, the fact that Tevildo and his cats have become enemies is, I mean, there's no question. It's not like they're gonna hold back from fighting them, when it comes to it. It's just a question of how they would treat them. So does Aradel know where her cloak came from? I mean, is she complicit in that, or is this, like, I guess what I'm asking is, do we think this is a sign of the sketchiness of the Feanorians, basically?
Right. It's left up to interpretation, but I would say that it does imply a fallenness if you're going to treat your enemy as something that you can skin and wear.
Yes. Yeah.
The Feanorians not having qualms is maybe well established at this
right
point.
Exactly. Yeah, qualms are relatively few on the ground over in that part of Beleriand. Yes.
And how much Aradel herself knows, at the very least, she may not know that these giant cats can talk.
Right.
That may not have come up.
Yeah, because she... Right.
We didn't have her present on the hunt or anything like that. She was just visiting them, and they gifted her this cloak. Right.
Which, even if she knows it,
one of the giant cats that we see talk is Tevildo anyway, so it's not like...
Right. It's true. I mean, and that by itself, yes. Like, I wonder how many of the other cats can talk. We never even really talked about that much. That there are other werewolves. There are other great cats with Tevildo. Are there other vampires as well with Thuringwethel? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
We definitely have other vampires.
So we have...
We've killed several at this point, so they're not all Thuringwethel.
Right. Right. Did we kill them in battle? Was it in battle that we killed them, or did they get caught?
Haleth's father killed one by...
Oh, right. Of course. Yeah. Right. I'm forgetting. Right. Yeah.
When they attacked the ships, the elves from the Havens also had to shoot some of them down.
Okay.
Season 3, episode 7, that is.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. There we go. All right. Yeah, and I had forgotten about the one with the Haladin earlier on. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, but yeah, I actually quite like how indefinite we've sort of left that. There are these monsters, and we don't... I mean, it is very clear that Tevildo and Drugluin and Thuringwethel are, very much sentient creatures who are part of Sauron's, inner circle. All of whom will be worn as pelts sooner or later at this point. we can all get together and wear Sauron's entire inner council as outerwear and upholstery. That's really nice. That's really nice. I like that. That's
We're just setting the precedent. That's all.
Yeah. We might as well go with it at this point. I mean, why spare Tevildo, really?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, of course, it's going to be interesting to sort out how to handle that exactly with Beren and Luthien. But
right. Beren's attitude towards animals is very extreme for a human. And
yes.
He's completely vegetarian and he's friends with animals and he wouldn't think of killing them. But I guess wearing a pelt that was already there.
Right. I mean, it's a perfectly good pelt just lying there. Yeah. Exactly. Besides which, Draugluin is an exception. It's almost like, with Beren, Draugluin could be an exception like in the other direction, right? Just as the elves might be like, well, the rest of these might perhaps be beasts, but Draugluin himself is clearly, there is a fallen Maya in there somewhere, right? And that's something that's worthy of respect. Beren would be like, yeah, I respect beasts, but not him, right? I mean, he's not one of the beasts who is my friend. He is Morgoth and Sauron's creature, and so therefore, yeah, I could imagine Beren kind of seeing that kind of flipped around in its way.
It's more what you call guidelines than actual
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, here I got all distracted talking about the people on the move here. It's Tevildo's cloak that distracted me, of course. Right, so they end up there in Amon Obel, there in the forest of Brethil. Now, so with the House of Haleth, what we're going to be looking at is where they come from, the kind of very humble roots that they come from, as, sort of homesteaders out there in the very, very southwestern corner of Thargelion, and the new society that they set up for themselves in the forest, because they were not forest dwellers before, right? They're going to become, and what they are going to become are basically the model for what in The Hobbit Tolkien calls the woodmen, right? Like those men who live on the western borders of Mirkwood in The Hobbit are clearly of the same kind of cultural group, and they're not the same people, obviously, but when Tolkien was writing The Hobbit, he was borrowing freely from the Silmarillion all over the place, right? And one of the things that he was that he certainly seems to have been thinking about was, I think, these folks. In particular, we get one of our best glimpses, really one of our only glimpses of them as a people in the Turin-Turambar story. When Turin is among them, and also first he's kind of on the outskirts when he is, because it's the same culture, right? I mean, like, this is, where is my cursor? This is Amon Ruth right here, right? Which is also what's in the background behind me. This is Amon Ruth, which is where Turin and the Outlaws eventually go live. Right. So Turin and the Outlaws, when he joins the Outlaws, they're living, before they move to Amon Ruth, they're living in the forests here that is on the outskirts of the lands of the Haladin. And so the woodmen whom they are raiding basically are Haladin, essentially. That's their culture. And then so we get some glimpse of them there, especially in the Children of Hurin, not in the published Silmarillion shortened version, but in the later version, which you can read bits of in Unfinished Tales, and which you can read in full, or all put together, I should say, in the Children of Hurin standalone. There, and then of course, finally, when Turin goes to them and lives among them and becomes their leader near the end of Turin's rather checkered career. So that's the society that they're going to kind of become. And so that's what we want to be thinking about tonight with the Haladin, where they came from and where they're going there. Now, with the Esto lads here, we're trying to figure out what to call them, Marie, and you weren't here to rein me in when we did that. So anyway, I
still like Esto ladders. 1 through Esto lad.
The Esto ladders? Okay.
Yeah.
The Esteladders over here, right? We have them starting off, and then they move over to Dorloman. So there's both they and the House of Bayor experience some radical transformation, right? We have them living on their own over here, and then they come and settle and become the people of Dorloman, closely allied, most closely allied of all of the three peoples with the elves, and living most in close conjunction with the Noldor of Hithlum up there. So we need to be thinking about both of those and both of those cultures and what directions they change and what are the implications of that change for them. And then we have got the House of Bayor, which really is in 3 states. It's the only one of these which is in 3 distinct states. We have the state that they're in when they arrive in Osirian, the first of all of the 3 houses to arrive here. And then they go to Nargothrond, and in Nargothrond they change radically. And then they leave Nargothrond and go to Ladros, and in Ladros they change radically again. So we have the 3 different states, and wanting to think about similarities and differences not only among these different states for the individual lines, but among each other as well. And so that we try to understand the characters of these people, because of course, having established this in this season, right? Season 5, we're kind of doing a lot of work to establish these cultures, because what we're going to get more than anything else, I think, in future seasons is going to be individual characters, right? So we need to know, we need to have a really clear kind of landscape established, right? Of, you know, what the final state of these cultures is like, and where they came from, so we can know the differences and the distinctions among them, because then we're going to get Beren, and we're going to get Hurin, and we're going to get Turin, and we're going to get Tuor, and so we need to understand all of those things and what all this stuff means. All right, anything else you guys want to add about the kind of overview here before we dig in? All right. The
size of it.
Excellent. So the dotted line here, Marie, is basically kind of the terrain that they were controlling, essentially, right? The Esteladders?
Right. That group is nomadic and has a bunch of different settlements that move around. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of indicated the area where they're existing, but there's not an individual settlement other than the Estelad gathering spot.
Right, and it's a big fat white space on the map, right?
Yeah. Right. It was generally just to remind us that they were having contact with their neighbors.
Right.
If I just had circled the name Estelad, I was afraid we might be misled to think that they're not interacting with, say, the Elves of Assyrian, for instance.
Right. Yeah, no, and this is going to be really important for us to remember as we move into, in the next session, we'll be talking about episode 7, which is the council, right, in Estelad. Right. So it's important to remember that they are, they're coming up against, the March Wardens of Doriath. They're coming up on Eol's terrain. They're going right along the boundaries of the Feanorians. They're encountering the Green Elves. So although they have found a nice spot where they can have their herds and roam fairly widely without getting into too much trouble, like they would if they tried to do that in Thargelion, they nevertheless are definitely, at the very least, encountering folks, if not actually encroaching. Especially, I would think this northern bit would be one of the sketchiest parts, right? One of the places where they would be most in peril as they're putting their toes over towards the Feanorian lands there.
We decided that Amlach and his family would be from there. Mm-hmm. I believe. Yeah. If I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah. Makes sense. And also helps to explain why Amlach ends up in that direction, right? When he goes over there. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So let us... Sorry, I'm just kind of mesmerized by this map, actually. I just keep... I'm about to advance the slide, and then I keep stopping and staring at it.
We can always come back and check it later if you need to see it again. We can always come back and
check it later. Okay. All right. House of Bayor. So let's start with the most complicated thing. So we have the transition from a migratory people first to a settled folk in Nargothrond, and then the second migration up to Ladros to form an independent settlement as part of the siege. And they are going, as we see Marion do it like instantly, they are the one who ends up way on the front lines, right? I mean, this is like the front lines. There's nobody fronter than they when they end up here. So that's really interesting. It's a very extreme move that they go on, a very deliberate move in that way. They could have, I mean, look at all this white space, right? I mean, look at this, right? They wanted to leave and establish their own spot. They could, look, there's nobody in Neverest these days, right? Nice place up there, right?
Right. It obviously wasn't just an issue of leaving Nargothrond. It was a very mission-oriented decision of where to go. Yeah. And that calls back to their initial decision to enter Beleriand in the first place. They were a very mission-oriented group to start with, so it makes sense that they would retain some sense of that mission.
Right, and that's the sort of primary continuity, the sort of the central thread of the people of Beor, right? That they're, whereas like if the Haladin are the ones who are looking to be kind of left alone, right, and not be a part of things, the House of Bayor is in that sense on the other extreme, right, where they have a purpose and they believe in a purpose. And ultimately, that's why they're going to be getting so frustrated in Nargothrond, because they are their purpose. They're being protected. They're learning things. You know, they are developing as a culture in some senses, but they are not being enabled. You know, and this is, of course, one of the places where we come, where we're going to be confronting, which is important because, of course, as we've been discussing from the beginning, the characters of Andreth and Finrod are really the kind of key central characters for the whole season. And the core discussion, like the core debate there, it's really where so many of the it's really where so many of the differences between elves and humans really come to the surface, right? Most forcibly, more than anywhere else, because what Finrod considers mere preparation for what is to, like for the elves, this would be just a time of preparation for, you know, the purpose to come. He doesn't ever envision himself as thwarting the purpose of the people of Beor. But of course, in the end, whole generations of folks are going by, are being born and dying and not doing anything, not accomplishing anything, and they feel that they are stagnating. I really like the suggestions you guys had about these sort of material symbols that they have, the staff and the stole. You guys want to talk about those?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, what we're doing there is we're representing different aspects of Beor's leadership, right? The stole represents the mantle of his responsibility, his wisdom, and the specifically responsibility of passing on knowledge from one generation to the next. The staff disappears for a while. Adonel doesn't get the staff. The staff is a representation of his directional leadership and his leadership in action. Right? So when Barahir and Andreth are kind of co-guiding the people in Ladros, they are each representing a different facet of Beor's leadership.
Right. And it makes sense that the staff would fall out of use in a sense, right? I mean, they're basically indoors, right? You don't need a walking staff indoors. Like, it's weird to carry around a staff inside. And so there's a sense in which that they're always they're always indoors, right? They're always in that kind of environment. And so no one ever used it. No one ever needed it. No one ever even thought of it. And so I really, so you guys were imagining a scene, right, in which Finrod gives the staff to Andreth, right, as kind of part of his sort of blessing upon their departure, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's great. I think that works really well, and is a really good opportunity to demonstrate Finrod's understanding, right? The development of his understanding of what's going on there and what's needed there.
Right, because there's a concern that the House of Bayor is not completely unlike the Noldor.
Right.
Where they, go to a Valinor and then decide, wait a minute, we don't want to be in Valinor anymore, let's leave. So
Right.
It was kind of important to demonstrate that Andreth's departure from Nargothrond was going to be much more cordial and much less bloody than Feanor's departure from Valinor.
Right.
No kinslaying, no ship burning,
right.
no doom of Mandos. Like, Finrod gives his blessing. He understands and permits this to happen.
Right. Yeah, no, it makes a nice departure to have, like, if Feanor had maybe, like, had a sit down like that with Manwë before he left, talk it over a little bit. Yeah.
Right, the part where Andreth is not Feanor is why this goes so much better
Yes,
for her people.
Really, yes, exactly. Yeah, and of course, you could say it doesn't end up well for her people, as like so many of them are going to be exterminated. But I don't think that really invalidates her choice at all. I mean, it's one of the things. In fact, I hope that we will build towards a reflection on that towards the end of the season. Like, I'd like to actually draw attention to that, because it could look like a failure. It could look disastrous, right? And aged Andreth, as she watches, the battle come and the destruction of her people and their new settlement, I'm sure that thought's going to cross her mind, right? Like, oh man, should have stayed in Nargothrond after all, I guess. This was a bad idea, right? But I really hope that we can have her rejecting that, basically.
Well, also, it's vindicated in Barahir's rescue of Finrod.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't know that we're necessarily going to be able to get a scene where Andreth is able to express, I guess I did the right thing in bringing us here so that we could all, nearly get burned to death. But if Barahir had not had an army of men standing at the ready to assist King Finrod probably dies.
Right.
And the quest of Beren fails, and the Nirnaeth never happens, and Arendelle never goes across the sea, and so on and so forth.
Right. So yeah, we'll show that action. I don't know that we'll have Andreth decide that it was worth it, because too many of her people have died, and she's grief-stricken and upset in the aftermath of the battle. She's not going to be like, it was worth it, totally worth it.
Right.
But the audience hopefully will see that, and she will have a chance to speak to Finrod, and Finrod can tell her that he understands what she did, and he understands that they wanted to, choose what to do with the time that is given to them, or however we want to have Finrod talk.
Exactly. And and Nick, even thinking ahead towards the chain of events that are made possible, as you were just suggesting, we could even give Finrod some kind of, not like a too detailed a foretelling, but get some kind of sense that, like, it's not just that he's personally grateful. It's not just that it's worked out for him personally because he got rescued, but that he has, even just like a conviction that good has been brought about by this. Like, even though disaster, has fallen, upon the people of Beor, yet good has come from, like, they have fulfilled their, like, he should have a conviction. I think Finrod should have a conviction, perhaps. You're right. Andreth is too grief-stricken and kind of embittered anyway. But Finrod could have the conviction that, like, they did it. Like, they have fulfilled, like, they have served their purpose. They have fulfilled a purpose. They have played a role, even though it was a tragic role, as are so many of the roles that people have to play in Middle-earth, and even there, one wonders if that also could be kind of an insight that Finrod gains from this, that because his role that he is going to play is also going to be tragic, right? It's going to be, in the end, he's going to do something very similar, right, to the House of Bayor. He is going to be, he has been spared so that he can eventually give his life in, an apparently hopeless cause in order to save someone else, even though he himself dies, right? So, he's going to reciprocate what happened to him, and it is going to be, part of this sort of larger purpose. Now, Stephen H. asks a really good question. Speaking of Andreth, where do we want her to go after the Dagor Bragalach? Dorloman, Brethil? That's a great question. What happens to her? I wanted her to survive the battle, right?
Yes.
But I didn't think much about what happens to her afterwards.
A retirement plan may have been suggested for her at some point in episode 8.
Okay.
When she has an encounter with another very famous female human character.
Yeah, we definitely do put Andreth and Haleth on screen together and let them meet and talk to one another in 2 separate episodes, because why wouldn't you do that?
Right. They meet on the way up, right? When they're traveling up.
Before Andreth makes her decision, actually.
Oh, really?
So like the people of Haleth are part of what helps Andreth
interesting.
shape her idea of what happened for those people.
And we can, there's structural reasons why why having them meet while en route could have been a problem. But this gets us more Haleth on screen, and that's never a bad thing.
Yeah. No,
But yeah, so we definitely will have Andreth with the refugees who are fleeing from from Dorthonion at the end of the battle, and some of them will end up in Brethil, and some of them will end up in Dorloman. And the 2 important characters that we will care about are that Rian and Morwen are among these refugees as children, and where they end up matters.
Yes.
Where Andreth ends is up to us. We don't have any strong reason to send her all the way to Dorloman, but if we wanted her there, we could let her go with the refugees to Dorloman. If we want to let her settle in Brethil for the end of her days, we could do that. The idea is that she's not going to go back to Nargothrond.
Yeah. It seems to have, more than anything else, a sort of symbolic significance, doesn't it? Because she's very old by this time, so she's not
She's only about 70 in our story.
Okay.
So yeah, she's not like that.
She's not that old. Okay, she's less old than I thought she was.
She's 94 in the original text, I understand. But in our story, she's 70.
Okay. All right. Okay. So that is not as bad as I thought.
But on the flip side, we have been hoarding a collection of human relics in Brethil, and I'd hate to break up the set. So
Brethil is where all the cool people go to retire.
Yeah.
Andreth is going to end up with Narsil. So wherever we want Narsil to end up is where we should put Andreth, is what this is coming down to.
Right.
Which I was thinking that some of the material culture and the items are things that we should talk about in this session, since we're thinking about the cultural significance of things we see on screen.
Yes.
So I'm not going to ask you to give the entire history of Narsil at this point, but to keep in mind that Andreth's destination is also Narsil's destination.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so let's actually... We haven't really talked about Narsil in a while. So this seems as good a time as any to pause and just recall. What's the history of Narsil? Narsil was forged by Telkar, of course, as Aragorn says, right? So
yes,
that's
so
clear.
We kept that because you wouldn't change that.
Of course. Yeah.
So Narsil is specially commissioned by Maedhros for Aegnor.
Right.
Because Aegnor's sword broke during the Dagor Aglareb, So he was in need of a new sword, and Maedhros is in need of some new allies because everyone hates the Baenoians. So he was like, aha, I will get the dwarves to make a nice new sword for my buddy, half cousin Agnar, who maybe will tell his brother.
Yeah.
Who will tell his brother not to hate me so much, maybe.
Right, maybe.
It was worth a shot. So that was the origin story for Narsil, is that we had it specially made for Agnar. Agnar, of course, is in a relationship with Andra that doesn't go well, and he will die in this battle.
Right.
So the sword can be recovered after his death, and Finrod can return it to Andra as a, like, here, he would want you to have this kind of moment.
Right.
So he's handing the sword to a 70-year-old lady who's like, thanks.
Right.
I always knew he would die in battle.
Right. Right.
And that's how Narsil ends up becoming an heirloom among men.
Right. So she brings it down to Brethel.
Elven. Yeah. So if she brings it to Brethel, then it's in Brethel, and eventually someone will have to take it to the Havens and take it to Numenor and all of that.
Right.
But that's up to us to figure out in future seasons.
I still love the fact that we're setting Narsil up to be basically Turin's backup sword. You know, like Narsil is like the second best sword available to Turin.
The sword that he doesn't choose when going to fight Glaurung.
Exactly.
Right. So so if we want it to be used by characters among the Haladin in the future, we can have it show up in certain battle scenes or whatever, as long as the sword gets brought back to the people and not left in like the Hill of the Slain at
right.
the Near Knife.
Right.
We can't put it there. But just about anywhere else, like, people can pick up swords that are dropped. It's not a problem to have a character use it and then die.
Yeah. That's actually a really interesting question. Like, it is a little bit tempting to have at least one moment in the story just be like it was almost abandoned and then somebody just happened to pick it up and that's how it like continues on. Like, that would be a little bit fun. But of course, one also feels like it should be a big deal. Like, it should be, the size of deal that Narsil is should be greater and greater as the years go by,
Right. As time goes on, it becomes a very unique sword.
Yes.
And among people like the Haladin who don't have swordsmiths of their own at the beginning of this story, they would obviously value that.
Yeah.
But during the First Age, it's one sword among many great swords that have famous makers and everything.
I think it wouldn't be that difficult to have and it was almost abandoned moment. That shouldn't be that hard to engineer.
Right.
Especially because I don't remember how much of its actual lineage we're told other than that Telkar made it.
Telkar made it in the deeps of time is what, Aragorn said.
Right.
We know that it was a Lendil sword. We don't exactly, I think, know how he came by it. We know how he came by the Ring of Barahir. We don't exactly know how he came by Narsil, though presumably it was similar, right? I mean, this would have been, by the time of Numenor, even by the time of the beginning of Numenor, it would be a significant relic of the ancient days at that point. And so it was now the sword of the king.
It's definitely an heirloom.
Right.
The question is, whose heirloom is it? Whose family is it being passed down in? Because by the time you get to Elendil, it doesn't necessarily have to have been from Silmarillion, from Elros. Like, it could have been any of his ancestors passing down the sword.
Right. So all that has to happen is for someone to lose track of its history at some point. And we have the situation that we discover in Lord of the Rings. And you can tell that it's made by Telkar because presumably she signed it, right? Like you do.
Right.
So it would make sense for even if its lineage was lost, to not to us, not to the audience, but to the people of Middle Earth, but they can still tell that it was made by Telkar.
Right. What if What if it doesn't go to Numenor? I mean, not for a while. What if it stays in Middle-earth and is ultimately a gift from Gil-galad to the faithful, way further down the line, right? So we could do a kind of a re-gifting, like it's given back again, like it gets back into the hands of the elves and then goes back to the men. Not necessarily like as far back as Aldarion, but like later on, with the faithful who are still trying to help Gil-galad in Middle-earth, and they're having an increasingly bad time of it as things as things are darkening in Numenor, and the faithful are still remaining faithful and trying to help in Middle-earth. It could be a gift to the house at that point. That would at least give us another, because if we make it an heirloom that gets passed down, like if it goes on the first boat to Numenor, basically, right? It's not going to be the king's sword, because we know what the king's sword is. The king's sword is Thingol's sword, Aron Ruth, right? So it's a little bit, and this is the second best sword in Numenor, and so it's gonna go, but like basically it just being kind of passed down from one person to another, it ending up with the Lords of Andúnier is not crazy. I mean, there's nothing strange about that. That would be easy to engineer. Again, just like the Ring of Barahir ends up with them, but in a lot of ways, it's going to be kind of idle, right? It's going to become, I don't know. I mean, I guess. There are things that could be done with that, but I almost kind of prefer it playing a role in Middle-earth, it could be Elrond's sword, for crying out loud. Like Elrond could use it or something.
It would be nice to make a Second Age story involving Narsil, where Narsil does something other than sit on the mantle of people in Numenor for 3,000 years.
That's exactly what it's the mantle thing that I was trying to avoid, essentially, that I was thinking it might be cool. So, and if it were something,
and only gift it to the Numenorians later, then we have a whole story with it, and it's cool.
Yeah, exactly. And so, Stephen, I am suggesting that it become the sword of the Lords of Andúnier. But again, if it's from like of old, right, from the time of the first Lord of Andúnier, it was his sword and it gets passed down, that's fine. And there's no harm done there. But again, it's going to mostly be collecting dust, for much of the time that happens. Whereas if we re-gift it, right, then it becomes like, it could be called even, right? Like, this is the sword of the faithful, right? And that's kind of a fun angle, right, to add to it. Like if that, Marie, is kind of its Second Age story, right? It becomes the sword of the faithful. And we could eventually get around to, like some sort of Gil-galad / Elrond story that ends up with like the moment where it gets passed, right, to a human again, to a Numenorian, one of the Lords of Andúnier.
I like that idea. I like the idea of telling a story. So.
Yeah. In which case, so if we leave it in Middle-earth, it also helps to explain why, again, there was no we don't want to have there be competition, right? We don't have we don't want like, Elros being like, which sword shall I take? Narsil or Aranruth? He takes Aranruth. So we just need to leave it at the Haven. So that would just mean it would need to end up with Gil-galad or Elrond, as I say.
Or Círdan. The three characters who are alive at the end of the First Age. And
right. No, they're not numerous, but they're significant.
Everything.
Yeah.
The Silmarillion is literally his family history. He's related to everybody in the story. Yes. He probably wrote it because he ignored everybody who wasn't related to him.
Yeah, exactly. But that's why I'm thinking it should. That's why I'm tempted to give it to Elrond, basically, to have it become Elrond's sword, and that he uses it. Elrond, and see, this is cool because then it's still very active, right, in the war against Sauron, right? As Elrond is the herald of Gil-galad and his right-hand dude. But it's also really cool when, like, the son-in-law ends up with it later on, right? It both makes the Battle of the Last Alliance kind of fun, right? I mean, it's like a fun angle in the Battle of the Last Alliance when like the Sword of the Faithful is drawn again, in the Battle of the Last Alliance. It gives this like, manifest destiny thing, right, to the Battle of the Last Alliance in a sense. It's this like fulfillment of, Elendil is stepping forward to fulfill this, this important and this ancient role. And the sword is like the symbol of that. But again, it's kind of fun if that was Elrond's old sword, right?
And also, if the while we probably wouldn't go as dramatic with this as the films do, but the sword is what identifies Aragorn as the heir of Elendil, and it's his status as the heir of Elendil, which means that it is by being faithful to him that the dead of Dunharrow are able to uncurse themselves.
Yeah, having all of those well built up associations of faithfulness, right? Faithfulness in, like in the Númenórean context, faithful to the old, the one allegiance from which you may not be absolved in life, right? As Amandil says, and so on moving forward, right? If the weight of that, right, the kind of symbolic weight of that is behind Aragorn as he bears Andúril, in the Lord of the Rings, that's really cool, right? What that means for Gondor more. I mean, it's kind of fun. This is, of course, the great payoff, right, of doing film, right? In the Lord of the Rings, in the books, the fact that this is the sword of Elendil returned is like a huge deal, right? Like out of antiquity, returning beyond hope into the present. And it will still have that, right? It'll still be that when we get there in film, except that'll just be like the latest thing, have this like, 3 times as much weight. That's only the modern history of that sword. And it will go all the way back to like the love of Aignor and Andreth, basically, is the sort of final thing that, as we will draw attention to that, at the end of this season. So I think that's pretty cool, and makes that fairly weighty. Plus, of course, it also just makes it more fun that Elrond is hanging on to the shards of his old sword for like several thousand years, like you do. So it's yeah. I mean, I'm kind of imagining a scene, like Elrond receiving the shards of Narsil and, him wielding the sword and being like, think of the memories of like, his time with Gilgalad and everything.
My sword.
Right. Who broke my sword? But, you just can't lend things to these humans, But anyway, that's fun. I think that's very cool. And also, again, overlays with this sort of extra texture, the kind of re-gifting of that. So, I mean, I'm imagining Andúril reforged, right? Brought by the Elvish smiths to Elrond, and then him kind of re-bestowing it upon Aragorn. And again, like that moment then again would be, we can have lots of like visual echoes to the original bestowing of the Sword of the Faithful by Gilgalad, or by Elrond himself. Gilgalad probably, since it's Elrond's sword, like it would probably come from Elrond. I can't wait till we think of, it won't be for a long time yet, but there's got to be a moment, right? There's got to be a really significant moment when one of the Númenórean faithful does something really significant, that leads Elrond to give him his own sword, right? And hand it on to them. That's a really symbolic moment. And so, yeah, something really, really powerful will have happened. We have no idea what it is yet, but it will be awesome when it happens. Yeah.
And if we want Elrond to get the sword, it's very easy. When the Feanorians sack the Havens, they'll just be like, "Oh, look, that old sword," and pick it up and steal it, and then give it to Elrond when he's old enough to have a sword.
Yeah. Oh, a gift. So have Maedhros regift it to Elrond, right?
Yep.
Yeah, because of course he'd recognize it, obviously. He was the one who commissioned it in the first place, right? So yeah, he could regift it to Elrond as a symbol of reconciliation, right? Between himself and Elrond, right?
To make himself
Maedhros is
feel
all
better.
about reconciliation when he's not killing people.
Exactly. Which he does with the greatest regret. Really, he does. It's mostly the second greatest regret. I think Magwar regrets it more, but but anyway.
There's a reason Magwar is their dad and Maedhros is the one giving them swords.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, I think it's I think it's good. Yeah. So if that happens, all that transfer from Elrond to the faithful, that when Narsil becomes the sword of the faithful, would just have to happen early enough. I mean, and we've got several millennia to work with there, with the wars of Sauron and stuff. So yeah. In fact, it could clearly be then, right? Like the breaking of the siege of Imladris, somewhere in that general area.
Mm.
We can work with it. Anyway, it's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna think about Second Age right now.
Early enough that he's not giving it directly to Elendil.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's all we have to do.
By the time it gets to Elendil, it's his family sword, and it's a very significant. I mean, especially as the times darken and darken and darken for the faithful in Numenor, it will become a more and more important symbol. Right? This is the sword of the faithful. This is the. Again, I'm sort of imagining. In fact, I'm now imagining the scene where Amandil is actually holding Narsil when he delivers that speech about there is only one allegiance from which one cannot be dissolved, because it's when he leaves that he's going to hand the sword to his son, right? That's when Elendil's going to get it, clearly, right? Is that so? Yes, I'm imagining, like, I can even picture it, like he's holding it, blade down, right, with the hilt between the two of them as he speaks his speech about how he's going to do it, and then Elendil's holding it, like they're each holding like one hand on the hilt as he's blessing his son and leaving, like, absolutely, yeah, no, clearly. So it's very, very significant to them by then. But again, it only has to be in the family for 500 years for that to have had that, especially given the 500 years in question, right? The last 500 years of Numenor. So, yeah, I think that's, I think it's cool. I think that really works. Stephen, as far as, Stephen says, why would Elendil be the only known wielder of Narsil if Elrond is just as notable? So first, a couple things there, Stephen. First of all, yeah, but like, he's gifted it to them, right? Elrond would want it to be known as the Sword of Elendil because that's the symbolic significance of it, right? He's the one who gifted it, so he would stand by the gifting, right?
Right.
And especially in lore, which he has a hand in, Maria, as you were suggesting, the lore that he has a hand in handing down and writing, he is not going to emphasize his, he's not going to call Narsil his own sword. He's going to call it the Sword of the Faithful and the Sword of Elendil. Yes. Yeah. Because especially since, Elendil's final usage of it, right? His final usage of it in the battle against Sauron and his giving his life, in the final fight with, this is like, he's redeeming the oath, right? He is showing himself faithful to the end. And so in that sense, the death of Narsil, right? The breaking of Narsil, is in that sense not tragic, right? And therefore also the more appropriate, right? That the shards of Narsil are what cut the ring from Sauron's hand, right? It's perfect. It's great. It's lovely. And so Stephen, and he can have other swords, like, they have the technology. They can make
like you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Elrond knows people who can make swords.
He totally. He's got a whole staff, right? So yeah. That's totally fine.
I can't wait to come up with the lineage for Gil-galad's spear. That's going to be way more interesting to me.
Yes. In fact, we have to think about that soonish, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So Gil-galad is born now in season 5, and he would appear as early as the end of this season. He is in Minas Tirith with Orodreth during the Dagor Bragollach.
Right.
And then in the aftermath, when Minas Tirith is taken by Sauron, in early season 6, he'll be removing to Nargothrond with his sister and his father,
Right.
and presumably his mother as well. And then we'll be involved in whatever court intrigue we have with Celorm and Curafin versus Orodreth.
Right.
So both Finduilis and Caleb should play a role in that story.
We have on hand, therefore, a very natural, like, assuming that Aiglos was made for Gil-galad, like was his weapon originally and not a hand-me-down, which again is of course not an insult when you're talking about weapons, right?
No.
But assuming that it was made for him, we have an obvious candidate. Celebrimbor could have made it for him.
Yeah.
Celebrimbor's there, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah, all we need is an occasion or a reason. Like we just need we need a relationship there, and we've established the relationship between Celebrimbor and Orodreth, right?
correct,
Mhm.
they're good friends.
Yeah. So
making a gift for Orodreth's son is, nothing would be more likely.
yeah, this is that's getting easy, right? So now we just need an occasion, and like why Aiglos, like why the icicle, why the cold spear, and so yeah, we're definitely gonna need a story for that. But is that a season 6 or season 7 story, you think?
That'll be season 6 because
Okay.
the
right, during the Baron and Luthien
the
story,
Baron.
right? Yeah, we're
Yeah,
breaking up
yeah.
yeah.
We'll have to have a pretty significant subplot in Nargothrond, so we'll probably start the Nargothrond story before Baron gets there.
Yep.
To establish some of these dynamics and figure out what's going on.
Okay. No, that's great. Okay. So we'll have, that's clearly, I think that's pretty clearly where he gets it right now. We need a history for it, right? I mean, we need, it's forging is good and everything, but, we're going to have to be following Aiglos fairly closely here, in order for that to happen.
Is it important to you if whether or not Gil-galad fights in the Dagor Bragollach?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so.
Because he could be in Minas Tirith the whole time. Like he could be part of. He could join up with Finrod's army
Right.
that gets trapped and needs to be rescued by Beor here, or he could be hanging out with Orodreth and then be part of the siege and taking of Minas Tirith.
I'm thinking the latter. It's a little bit tempting to have him with Finrod. I mean, it's a little bit tempting just to like start getting him on screen, basically. But like, let's not be greedy. He's going to have plenty of screen time, right? He's going to be the longest lived elf hero of all of the elf heroes except Elrond. So he'll have his moments for the entire Second Age. But so that's one thing. We don't need to be greedy with him. The other thing that I'm a little worried about, I don't want to dilute the Barahir Finrod thing, right? So, on the one hand, it's a little bit cool to be like, and Gil-galad is also saved by that moment. So now he also has a link in there. But I think to me, that feels like it waters down the Finrod story and the Barahir Finrod Baron thing. So maybe not.
As long as we're aware of the potential benefits of tying the faithfulness of Elendil to Gil-galad to this other moment where Barahir is faithful to Finrod. Just throwing it out there that the two things are at least tangentially related.
Thinking of the faithfulness thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of other attachments, so it's not like we're suffering from a dearth of them.
Yeah. The hardest thing about Narsil is it's going to be idle for a while, right? It's going to get buried in Brethil. Almost literally, right? If we're going to have it almost lost at some point. And again, the most exciting thing that happens in Brethil, namely Turin and the slaying of Glaurung, is not going to involve it, right? We can't even bring it out of retirement for that. Bring it out of Hawk in Brethil. So it wouldn't be until somebody ends up with it down at the Havens, and Maedhros ends up, Maedhros loots it off of somebody's corpse, that we finally get it back and get it to Elrond.
Yeah, there's not too many heroes among the people of Brethil as far as the battles and stuff go, but is it Haldir who fights in the Nirnaeth? One of them fights
Yes.
in the Near Night. One who's married to Glora, though, whoever that is.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, we can put Narsil at the Near Night if we want to, as long as someone brings Narsil home.
Right. Right. Someone's got to find it. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. Stephen H. is pointing out that only 3 return. Right. So, right. Well, only takes 1 to get Narsil back to Brethel. Yeah. 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 Michael D was suggesting, what if Gilgalad has an inferior spear that breaks disastrously, either in this battle or at another one, and then his Aiglos is sort of the improvement. One way or another, isn't he gonna be at the attack on Minas Tirith, right? When Sauron takes Minas Tirith, he's gonna be involved with that, right?
Yeah.
So we're gonna get the opportunity to get Gilgalad in combat pre-Aiglos, assuming Aiglos comes from Celebrimbor, which seems like destiny. Besides which, it's just super fun to connect Gilgalad and Celebrimbor at that point, because I mean, Gilgalad and Celebrimbor is like the Second Age, right? So showing the beginning of their relationship and them working together cooperatively from day one, way back at the beginning in Nargothrond, where it all started for them is really that's just too much fun to pass up, for sure. But yeah, I could see him, Michael. I could see us kind of setting it up, having him lose a weapon, right, and need a new weapon when he finally goes down there. Yeah. Now, of Gondor was asking on Twitch and YouTube, are the seasons going to be going to be their best to be chronological with all the simultaneous storylines? Yes, we're trying to be chronological all the way through. It's challenging in places. We're already kind of bending things a little bit. I think we're going to bend things a little bit. Well, we're seeing. I think we're still going to debate the question of how we're going to do Hurin and Huor in Nargothrond, in Gondolin. I mean, that's one of the challenging bits.
I believe the intention is to reveal in season 6 that they have vanished,
right,
and then begin season 7 with their time in Gondolin to show where they have been.
Okay, right.
That was what was floated already. Obviously, we can discuss that in later seasons. The real challenge will be telling the stories of Tuor and Turin, which happen more or less simultaneously, but we probably don't want to intermix them. But I don't know how you want to handle that. That's a question for down the road.
That is a question for down the road, but it's a fascinating question for down the road.
Especially because they do kind of meet.
They literally cross, right? At that one point. So, yeah. And, it's all kinds of tempting, I got to tell you, to break up the story of Turin. I mean, like the story of Turin Turabar. I mean, I'm sorry. It saps my will to live every time I read it. And it's it's so unrelenting. It's so unrelenting, that whole story. And so, paralleling, telling those two stories in parallel instead of in series is a little tempting. But
part of the problem is that chronologically they don't really line up, and it would be very difficult to get them to hit the same kind of beats at the same time.
Yeah, it is true. It is true.
They're thematically rather different stories.
They are, which is one of the things I'd be interested to see. But as you say, that's a question for another time. For several years down the road. Not too many. What is that? We'd be bumping up against that in season 6 is
Baron and Luthien. Season 7 is the Nirnaeth.
Up to the Nirnaeth. So it'd be after that.
We have not yet discussed what season 8 will look like.
Yeah, for planning season 8, basically, is where this decision would have to be made. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the Tuor story that's told as flashback, essentially. The rest of it is chronological, right? when you read the Silmarillion, it's the Tuor story, which is like, but now going back to the Nirnaeth Arnoediad and following this other thread, you know.
Large chunks of the Silmarillion are told non-chronologically.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Certainly when you get to like the, yeah, I mean, it's true. But I'm thinking of like the, you know, you get like the Dagor Bragalach and the Baron and Luthien and the Nirnaeth Arnoediad and Turin and the fall of Doriath and then the fall of Gondolin, which is kind of next, except like, wait, meanwhile, we have to go back and retrace Tuor and what he did through that whole time and how we got there. So that's what I'm saying. Like there's this generally chronological flow in that portion of the Silmarillion, except for Tuor. Tuor is the big exception. So, yeah. Yep. Well, it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be interesting. Yeah. I'm gonna have to. We're gonna have to see, but that's not today. Getting back to where do we get Narsil? That's how we got off onto all this. And the staff of Beor, right? Okay, so let's focus back again on what we're supposed to be talking about, which is the House of Bayor, and it's so. From when they arrive over, Nick, you were thinking of them as an almost like Stone Age culture, right?
Yes.
Technologically speaking, when they cross the mountains, right?
Right. So when Beor, so basically the three different cultures are in three different stages when they arrive. Mm-hmm. So Beor's people have no metal tools or weapons whatsoever when they arrive. Right. They've kind of been moving ahead of the wave of human culture, and they haven't really stopped to establish trade relations with anybody on their way. So it's not, they've just been moving too fast. They're too focused on getting to where they're going because they're basically on a spiritual pilgrimage,
Yeah, right. No, that makes sense. And I like the fact that we're sort of showing them to be, it's a fun opportunity to show us a group. And we do this to some extent already with like the Green Elves, right? That is to show a society which is not very technologically advanced at all, right? Has very little metallurgy or anything like that. And yet is not like a primitive culture either. Like they have some learning, but more importantly, like they have a purpose and they have art, like we have their song and everything, right? So we have art and music from them and they are a good and an important people, but crude, right? They don't have much in the way of technology. And so while they're in Nargothrond, the House of Bayor is going to be learning a lot. Now, one of the things that we had talked about, you mentioned here on the slide, in which we had talked about a good deal earlier on, is that they're going to become a bookish society while they are in Nargothrond. That they're going to become literate, but they're going to be utilizing the written word, which they're going to learn from the elves, differently from how the elves do, right? It's going to be one way to kind of emphasize this whole idea of keeping annals and archives. Is going to be really weird to the elves because they don't do that. They write, but they don't write for that reason. They don't write to keep records.
They have living memory.
Exactly. This is something that people so easily forget. Like people forget how weird Rivendell is from an elvish perspective. Like, I mean, and by the Third Age, it's not quite as weird, but I think because Elrond is like the first elf most anybody meets, right, who reads Tolkien, and Elrond in a lot of ways becomes like the archetype in some ways for elves, right? I mean, not exclusively, but anyway, I mean, he's pretty close to it. And of course he's the lore master, right? And he's, in this house and it's not like his books are referred to very much, but it's pretty clear that there is much lore gathered in that house. And he's the greatest of lore masters, as Boromir, as well as Denethor tells Boromir. So we kind of associate that with elves, but that's not normal, right? That's not that kind of, adherence to written lore and collection of written lore is not, especially among the elves of the First Age, it would have been largely unknown. So I like that. But of course, this is going to immediately be one of the things that's going to kind of point to the problem, right? On the one hand, they're keeping records. On the other hand, there's nothing to talk about, right? Right. This another year in which nothing happened. It's going to be like the annals of the House of Bayor in Nargothrond are going to become very boring, right? As they are keeping them. But that could be a thing. I could even imagine that being a kind of, something that really kind of not brings it to their attention, but is a way to really kind of highlight that.
Right, because they have stories from before. They have stories of their journey and of their quest and of what they fled from in the east that they don't want to talk to the elves about.
Right.
So they do have an oral tradition,
right.
which presumably is written down at some point during their stay in Nargothrond. But they're not adding to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like this year's annals are who was born, who died, and like how much grain we bought, I guess.
Right.
I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, do they just keep ledgers at this point? Do they? Yeah. No, exactly. It's, and again, that, and thinking of Andreth, right, in her role as wise woman as well, like the passing on of stories of the old days to the younger generations is still important, and they've written them down, and that's a good thing. And so again, I mean, like that by itself, actually, I mean, the written records of the House of Bayor in Nargothrond are almost a perfect symbol of the problem, or of the situation, I should say, right? Because on the one hand, they now can write, like they now have written records, like they now have these stories, and some of these stories can be things. I mean, we have some fun opportunities here, right? We can show some of the books, right, that they have, some of the books that they've written. Those books can make cameo appearances, like in Numenor, basically, like in Elros's library in Numenor. He may still have some of these books. I know some of them are not going to survive because we're going to burn Ladros down to the ground, but some of them will escape with the women who flee. And, but we know that some of the pre-Beleriandic legends survive in Numenorian lore. Tolkien talks about that. This is my number one candidate for where those come from, basically. So yeah, I mean, like there won't be many, but there could be a couple. Like there could be, we could show on screen for super attentive people, like some of the very, very ancient, records of the House of Bayor that are, of the older days, of the pre-Beleriand days, which are still retained by the greatest lore masters of Numenor.
It kind of makes me wonder if the Athrobeth itself is actually a retelling and reframing of the book of Adonel, or the scripture according to Adonel, something like that.
Yeah, that's of course the context in which it comes up when Tolkien is talking about the Athrobeth and the tale of Adonel and stuff, is where he talks about the survival of some of those stories into Numenor and how the tradition of in his, like, of course, as he does in all of his later days, like, how did the tale of Athrobeth come to be preserved? Like the tale of the Athrobeth. So anyway, yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that we can have. So again, there's good that comes, right? This is good. They wouldn't have this if they didn't gain, this technology from the elves. But of course, it also at the same time draws attention, Marie, as you were saying, to their, how lame the later editions are. And they know, like, the very preservation of the story of their people is a continual reminder of that they have not fulfilled their mission, and that, although they're appreciative, they have not, they will not have the opportunity to do so here. Nick, tell me more about the metalworking that you're thinking of them learning there. Like when they leave, how well armored are they? I'm thinking middle, right? That is, like, if the House of, if the Haladin are still, like, sort of the least technologically advanced from a military perspective by the end, right? And I would assume that the House of Hador would be the most, because they would be most fully integrated with the Noldor war machine up there, right?
Yeah. So for because basically I envision that while maybe the first generation or two of the men of Beor who are in Nargothrond progress their knowledge of technology by leaps and bounds, after that, it kind of like there's a diminishing returns, right? Because the elves aren't really teaching them as far as they need to go,
Right.
right? So when they leave, they have a basic understanding of what is happening, right? But they're not experienced smiths. Like there are no smiths who are masters of their craft amongst the Baorians when they move to Ladros. And so when they move to Ladros, they're basically having to create a martial culture from scratch. Right, with some help from the Elves of Dorthonion, but the Elves of Dorthonion don't really know what these guys should be doing. Right, because the Noldor, their entire military strategy is form a line and kill the orcs as they get close to you. Right, that's basically been, well, as far as the Elves of Dorthonion go, that's basically been their entire experience of warfare up until this point. Whereas humans, they have to be a little bit more circumspect, right? they need to be a little bit more careful with the situation. They are not fresh from
Right, they're not going to be
Valinor
mowing down
with
the
light
orcs
of their
like
eyes.
grass,
Yeah.
like the Feanorians did in the first battle, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, it's not even close. So they are, like I said, working from scratch, whereas the Hador, the House of Hador was already a more martial culture than the Beornians to start with.
Right.
And basically, I can see Hador and Finrod and Fingon kind of working together to figure out what what their strengths and weaknesses are.
Right.
To put together something,
Right. There, exactly. I mean, I see the House of Hador having a more clearly defined and collaboratively thought through military role in the Noldor war machine up there in the Northwest, right? They know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They know their relationship to that. Whereas, again, as you say, Engrod and Agnor know about, they welcome the Beorians up there and are kindly disposed towards them, but don't really exactly know what to do with them, and are probably not quite as collaborative as Hador and Fingon are, militarily speaking. What other elements of elven material culture would you say that they have adopted? Obviously, there are going to be things that are going to mark the House of Bayor as having dwelt among the elves, right? They will be, their clothes and things would be very different from the clothes of the Haladin, for sure, right?
Also, their agriculture is probably going to be very different. The way that they do agriculture is probably going to be a lot closer to what the elves do than what other human cultures are doing, right? They're probably doing more permaculture, like we've talked about the elves doing,
right?
Which, because they weren't an agricultural society when they got here either. They were a hunter-gatherer society, right. And so when people of the House of Hador or even the House of Haleth come to see them, they're gonna be like, that's interesting.
Right.
But I would think that their agriculture particularly would be more advanced. So while in some areas they're actually, on the lower end of the spectrum, they're essentially the breadbasket of of that line. Right.
Yeah. Right. Now that makes sense. Their clothes would be fancy, but their armor crude, right? Because they would have clothing, and making clothing is certainly something that they would have learned from the elves. in Nargothrond. And the elves of
They would have
Nargothrond,
adapted elven styles and elven methods of clothing making. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
they would have wanted to dress them nicely, right? Because they're taking care of them. Like they would, but they wouldn't have been teaching them, armor making, right? Because they don't need armor making, right? But they need to make nice clothes so they can live in Nargothrond like everybody else.
Right.
And so there would, I would think, in that on casual non-military occasions, I would think that the House of Bayor would look pretty snappy compared to certainly compared to the Haleth, though perhaps that's no great mastery. But even I would think compared to the House of Hador, where again the emphasis, their primary interaction with the elves has been military, right? And so that's where the chief influences would be.
so you're suggesting that Finrod has dressed Andreth as an elvish maiden, and then sent her off to Ladris, where she runs into
Meet his
Ignar, who's
brother,
like,
yeah,
"Ah."
exactly.
Yeah, so it's a very Galadriel, Aragorn, Arwen situation going on.
Exactly, yeah, that's just right. Because I mean, and that's, yes, I mean that really fits the sort of picture, right? That when Ignar first meets Andreth, he would, she would look like an elf maid, and I mean there would be differences, but that it would definitely be like that. Yeah, JJ, exactly. JJ says they'd basically become dandies. Yeah, exactly. No, that's just what they are, and increasingly discontented dandies. I do imagine there's a younger generation of folks who wear their fancy elvish clothing with deliberate rips and things like that, to those rebellious Beorian teenagers that we talked about before, probably.
So you're saying their style needs to be grunge?
Yeah, there's or maybe even a goth
Grunge
Beorian
Elven?
subculture, yeah, that's exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Without the makeup maybe, but or maybe so. Maybe really, really pale and black to emphasize we're kept inside in the caves and it's a form of protest, right? I don't know.
And why wouldn't they have makeup?
Why wouldn't they? Yeah, absolutely. They've got nothing else to do. So yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Yeah, no, definitely. Okay. All right. Quick, before I devolve even further, let's move on to the House of Haleth, which, of course, we've already touched on the other houses some, so the other two will be quicker. But we have, Nick, as I was saying, you were imagining them being kind of in the middle. They're a little bit more they have more bronze or even steel items, than the Beorians did at the beginning.
Right. So the House of Haleth, they don't have a lot of metallurgy or metallurgical knowledge themselves.
Right.
But they have had trade with the dwarves and then later trade with the Noldor. They probably aren't getting a lot of metal items from the Avari or anything like that. But they did have trade with the dwarves and then later the Noldor, like I said. And so I imagine that these folks, probably each household has one metal item.
Right.
One metal either tool or weapon or something like that. In the case of Haldad, he happens to have a spear, which gets passed down.
Yeah, which just becomes the big deal, and that's why it becomes a big deal, because it is a big deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Having a metal spear is not a small thing, and it would be kind of interesting if they were using bronze in a place where most people are already using steel, because bronze is a lot easier to repair. For example, to sharpen your bronze blade, you don't have to grind it quite so much, because you can do a lot of the sharpening just by hammering it. Because it's more malleable than steel is.
Right.
So
right.
There are reasons why you'd want bronze over steel, even though steel is obviously harder and stronger.
Right. bronze is lighter too, isn't it? A little bit.
Maybe a little. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, copper's 33 and iron is heavier than 33. Wait, no, 33 is gallium. I don't know what I'm saying. The point is, copper is lower on the periodic table than iron, and I'm gonna not say the wrong numbers because I'm technically a chemistry teacher, and that's bad.
Yeah. So it's anyway. So we're imagining them. They have. What do they do for armor? Do they have armor?
No, because they are not a martial culture.
No, so they don't have armor at all.
Right. When we meet them, they are a non-martial culture. They don't have. I mean, their clothing is probably particularly tough because they're working every day. You know, they live in a dangerous world. So yeah, they probably do have some
Oiled
level
leather, maybe.
Right. Maybe some leather, some. They would have some like hide. I mean, because they'd have hides and furs, right?
Yeah, but leather as protection is. It's not as much of a thing as you typically see in movies.
Right.
So, but definitely tough clothing, but no armor per se, because they have no military tradition whatsoever.
Right.
They're not even, when we meet them, they're not even an organized group.
Right. It's Haleth who's going to bring them together. Now, do they do anything? What changes do we see between like the time right before the stockade battle and the time right before they enter the Nandungortheb? So they've had some time, right, including several months where they're out there by Doriath hoping to get through. Have they made preparations? Like as they're going on their journey, are we seeing ways? I mean, they will already have come a pretty significant way along the road to becoming now a unified culture under Haleth's leadership. Do we see them taking? I mean, there's at least going to be a kind of a subcast like her Amazons, right, of more militant figures, right?
Yeah. So they're going to have something of a martial culture by the time they get to Doriath. We're going to see a bit more of that later on in the season, but their martial culture is mostly going to revolve around hunting,
right?
And hunting of large game. Right. So rather than soldiers, they have hunters who would also function as soldiers in a pinch, right?
Right. Or maybe perhaps warriors rather than soldiers. Right.
Yeah.
Right. More like a Germanic tribe, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of. Go on.
Yeah, they've come together as a group at this point. So they're traveling together. So they are migrating, and they've obviously survived the stockade battle. So most of them took part in fighting there. So even if they're not like officially technically a soldier, there's a lot of people now with experience of battle. There's a lot of concern for safety that would translate into setting up their camp with an eye to guards and all that. So yeah, I would say that what you would see would look not terribly unlike a Germanic tribe in Northern Europe.
Right. Okay. And so when they finally then settle down, they're once again going to sort of become more dispersed, right? They're going to be like bunches of individual homesteads in the forest, mostly governing themselves. They're still Haleth, and so there is a tradition of, it's not that they have no central leadership, but their central leadership is probably going to mean least to them of any of the cultures of men, right? I'm just thinking of the way in which like
they would keep
we
that
remain
fierce
independent
streak, definitely, and therefore value each man being a king of his own household thing. But they have developed a communal lifestyle now, and that would continue at Amanol. They would have basically a town there, where there's multiple families living together. And it's not everyone. There's other households scattered throughout the forest. But that element of communal living is what's changed, because prior to the stockade, that didn't exist for them. They were strictly homesteads.
Right.
Now they're kind of a mix of homesteads and the community and coming together for important events.
Right. Okay.
So maybe more of like a hill fort kind of situation where it's a very defined location where everyone can be.
Right. And we can still see this, like, again, in Turin's story, right? I keep coming back to Turin because this is the other place where we really see this culture in the later Silmarillion. So yeah, I mean, when he comes back and, you know, during the time of his happy marriage with Nienor, it's in exactly that kind of a town environment. I mean, you do get the sense of him living among all, he's not just like living with a random family, you know, like in their own independent homestead. So you would have that, though there are also clearly especially from the versions of the story in the Children of Hurin, clearly those remote homesteads still scattered around when he's with the outlaws. We see that especially. So, and I love the emphasis that this is still a completely non-literate culture. They would have only oral traditions, very much focused on oral traditions. And I would think that, again, another, you know, Marie, thinking along similar lines, one of the consequences of what they have gone through, right, and how it has changed their culture would be this sort of like regular gathering and remembrance, right? Remembrance of what they have done and, you know, who they have become and of the times that were in this. I mean, as we know that Haleth is still looking back, you know, at her father and brother who are gone. And, you know, all of them would be kind of looking back, of course, at their, you know, their traumatic experience in Nendan Gortheb, but they would be remembering all of the things that they have survived and all of the you know, and of course the hunting of Tevildo is going to be another, you know, major thing that they will be remembering. But again, all of this would be done in an oral context right there.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And dogs. Yes, dogs are important there, clearly. Hunting dogs. Definitely a dog culture. Again, I'm remembering the outlaws.
I think I put the dogs on the slide because horses are on the slide for the House of Hador. I think that's why.
Yeah.
Where that
No,
came
but
from.
it's important. I think that's, and didn't we have a dog? Well, we
There
briefly.
is a dog.
Haleth briefly had a dog, right?
Haleth had a dog that is then gone by the time the stockade battle happened.
Right.
And you
Right.
and Dave were both very quick to point that out to me. However, Haleth's grandmother disappears in the interim between those two events. Haleth's mother disappears in the interim between those two events. No comment was made on that. But her dog, what happened to her dog? It's like, it's been 12 years. What do you think happened to her dog?
Right. Yeah. See, no one was accusing anyone of eating the grandmother, you know. But yeah, absolutely. Anyway, yeah, no, but dogs.
That was a deleted scene.
No, very deleted. Sorry, I just paused for a second because, of course, there was a conspicuous lack of dogs after the stockade, as we discussed at the time.
So the dogs come back.
The dogs come back,
again.
right? The dogs come back. But see, that's what I just suddenly had to think. What if Beleg gives them dogs? Like, what if they got dogs from Doriath? They need to get them from somewhere, right? I mean, they could find them, I guess, but wouldn't it be kind of fun? Wouldn't they? If they were gifted dogs? I don't know. I mean, not like that's going to be a scene, but
Beleg's a huntsman. Presumably, he has hounds.
Yeah, or at least knows people who do, right? So,
I think I was picturing them maybe finding dogs in the aftermath of the stockade battle. You know, dogs who had run away from the fight and were still perfectly alive somewhere off screen.
That's right. The dogs had all gone off somewhere into a happy place that we just never see them again. Yes, exactly.
But yeah, if they received something from the elves that then they could incorporate into their culture without feeling like they've been given elvish culture. That would probably be a neat
Yeah,
balance.
I think that would be, that
They don't
seems
want
to me like
elvish
the,
clothes. They don't want
yeah,
elvish stuff. They're not interested in books, but dogs. They'll take you up on that.
yeah, yeah. That does seem to be like the kind of gift that she would accept, right? Um, yes, yeah. Okay, and then of course we have her signs of leadership, the pelt of Tevildo, and and her spear, right, which becomes
Yeah,
a scepter
spear.
after it's broken.
Yeah, the
Yes.
spear should definitely be on this list. I forget why I left it off.
You don't
It's really
like
an oversight.
that spear.
I just keep forgetting about it. I think I just already had the medal in the other part of the slide.
Right,
That's it.
right.
But yeah.
Okay.
Nick has to continually remind me that Haleth has a spear. For some reason, I keep forgetting about her spear.
All right, and then finally the House of Hador. So we start off with them as nomadic herdsmen, horse culture. So, like, now when we say horse culture, what do we think? Are we thinking like Mongols here, or less extreme than that, or?
I mean, everything's less extreme than Mongols.
I know, that's why I cited them as the end of the spectrum.
Yeah,
there.
less extreme than that. But they're moving from place to place, so they have to pack up all their belongings and travel. And presumably they're using horses as pack animals, and they're using horses for hunting, and they're using horses to herd their animals around. So the horses are quite useful to them.
Yeah.
And integrated into their lifestyle.
Yeah.
So somewhere between the Mongols and say the Plains tribes of North America, post contact, obviously, because pre contact no horses. But yeah.
Right. And I'm still, I think I suggested last time that I would kind of like them to have like
Shetland ponies.
Yes, well, like Icelandic horses, basically. Yeah,
okay.
That's just what I'm thinking. Because you can build a perfectly good, cavalry-based warrior culture with Icelandic horses if you don't have any other horses, right? If you've never seen, like an Arabian horse. So because I mean, there should be a real, like the Caligorm's cavalry should be something quite stunningly different than the horses of the Esther ladders. Yeah,
I'm fine with elves having Andalusians and the House of Hador not.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Riding unstriped zebras.
Yeah, I mean, yes, these are like more wild.
Like Mongolian wild horses are like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, and I absolutely adore the idea of Esterlad being like the Althing, this kind of regular gathering, them being a completely nomadic culture, but having this gathering site. It's just a lovely interpretation of that, word, right? Of that name. I think it's really cool. And I love the way, as I was saying on the map earlier on, having them be nomadic helps them have opportunities to butt heads with every single elvish culture in the area, because they're all over the place and they're not going to do the boundary thing, like that. Some of the boundaries are going to naturally happen, right? Like the big rivers. So fortunately, the River Gellion is large, right? So the River Gellion is going to keep them from, wandering too far, either into Osirian, into the, encountering the unfriendship of the Green Elves, or into encountering the much more serious unfriendship of Caranthir, right? If they get over there. But it's still going to happen, right? It's still going to happen. It's going to happen. So... Yeah.
Well, their conflicts are not unlike the conflicts in Oklahoma, right? Because the farmer and the rancher aren't friends, essentially, right? So they come through, they tear up the ground, and then they move on. And the elves are just like, but are you going to fix that?
Right.
Like,
right. it would look to them like orc work, like wanton hewing, right? Like slashing at things that were not even in their way. Again, I'm like the quotes about elves, about orcs are kind of floating in, right? And it's what it would look like. They would look at where these people and their herds had gone through, and they'd be like, the devastation of the land that they've just left behind them, right? As they wander on. Yeah, that would be an issue, even for the non-touchy, right? I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, I would think that the Elves of Doriath would not be looking kindly on them, right? They wouldn't be encountering them much because they can't go in, but
Doriath and Nan-Elmoth have boundaries that are protected, so it would be difficult for the men of Estalad to wander into Doriath.
Right, no, but they would see them is the point. Like, they would come up to Doriath. And so, like, there would be times when the Elves of Doriath would be coming out and seeing, like, look at what happened. Like, this used to be a really nice... Because eventually, I mean, occasionally, surely, they come out and wander in the lands, right? And they would come out and they'd be like, who wrecked the joint, right? This place used to be nice. So that's the kind of encounter. I know they wouldn't be wandering into Doriath or into Nan-Elmoth, but they're wandering right near them and around them, and so there would be at least enough encounters, certainly, for the humans to be aware of their presence and maybe uneasy about their presence, because they would be encountering hostility, because all the elves would be kind of hostile to the way that they carry on. Right. And this goes back to what we talked about, a couple weeks back when we were talking about elves and men and talking about their different relationships to nature. Right. Humans seeing nature, like life as a struggle against it's us versus nature. Right. And we aim to survive is kind of the attitude, of cultures in this place. And I mean, in this, sort of place in their, in their development. And the elves just have a very different relationship with the world around them and would not understand that entire attitude. So yes, it would seem, there probably are, men of the Estalad culture who are indeed like corrupt and nasty, but they would seem to the elves more corrupt than they actually are. Again, they would look like orcs, or certainly the evidence of their passing would look like an orc army had been through there, at least there would be similarities there to the elvish eye, doubtless. But okay, anyway. So when Hador takes them north, he's taking them north. They are making a choice. They are making the strongest choice of all of the human cultures to ally themselves with the elves, to join with the elves. They are answering what is almost a recruitment call by the elves. So they've made a deliberate choice. How is this deliberate choice reflected in their culture, like in their material culture and in the way that they live? Are they still nomadic up there in Dorloman?
I think that, so the way that we've set it up is that Hador and a small group of humans go to live kind of amongst the elves for a time. And then Fingolfin says, hey, we've got this stretch of land that nobody's using. You guys should settle over there. And Hador's like, you know what? That's great. I'm going to bring my folks over there. But we're going to do things a little differently than we've done them in the past. Mm-hmm. Right. And they shift to a more stable, closer to the elvish lifestyle that he's seen, but a more human version of that. Right. They adopt civilization to a degree.
Also, they're going to be wearing armor that is elven armor. So they are outfitted the same way Fingon's elven soldiers are outfitted. Mm-hmm. So full gear, full kit of weapons and armor that is...
If you have, Noldorin metal armor and weapons, you almost need a house to keep it in, right? I mean, like, you're not going to go around with that on the back of, like in a tent on the back of a horse, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the things that so we had talked about, so the Estelad culture does have their own metallurgy when we meet them, right? But you're talking about, like, there's a guy in, like, out of every 3 different traveling group, there's one guy who carries around his portable forge, and he builds a new bloomery out of clay everywhere he goes and sets up shop, right? And so they're kind of making things out of metal, but it's not the same. But when they move, now they have to maintain all this equipment, right? So that means that they need stable shops, right? You
need a real forge. Right.
So even just their manufacturing requires them to have, small, like at least towns, right?
Yeah, I could see it. And one of the things that they would clearly be doing is studying smithcraft. Like, there would be people who would be learning smithcraft from the Noldor up there more actively than any of the other two, so that their own smithcraft becomes obviously sub-Noldorin, but but the closest to it.
They already know the basics, right? So they're smiths that already have an understanding of how to do the basics, go and kind of observe what the Noldoran smiths are doing. They're like, oh, okay, I can do that. And then they go back and they develop it over time. Right?
It sounds
so they don't get that same, like, speed boost that the Beorians get when they first arrive in Nargothrond, but they do have they have a broader base of existing knowledge.
So here's what this sounds like a really fun creative challenge, right? Like, the armor of the House of Hador would be, on the one hand, like the armor that some of it would just be given to them by the Noldor. It would just be straight up Noldorin armor, but not all of it, right? They would make their own as well. And the armor that they make would both be derived. They're learning the technology from the Noldor, so it would be very strongly influenced by the Noldorin styles and the Noldorin approach to armor. But it would also be influenced by their own traditions, right, and by where they came from, which is primarily light cavalry, right, is the way that they have always fought. And presumably, again, thinking about the kind of discussion that Hador and Fingon are obviously going to be having off screen, right, presumably this is still going to be their role. Like, light cavalry is still going to be primarily the role of the House of Dorloman, maybe developing into heavy cavalry. But you'd think cavalry, because that's been their culture and that's what they know and they are most comfortable with. And their horses, of course, would be greatly improved when they get into the north, right? So yeah, that they would be, anyway, I'm just kind of thinking, about what they would like. It would be a fun challenge to make human armor made by humans but derived from Noldorin styles and methods, and yet also, reflecting the sort of nomadic light cavalry traditions that they had before. So.
Yeah, you would want relics of the original in the final product, in the same way that the various styles of Greek columns in stone reflect the time period when it was made from wood. Right. Like all the little curly hues at the top and everything. That's you don't need to do that with your stone column. Right. But it's a relic of the past. So it would be the same idea, that there would be something about it that is reminiscent of what they had before. Right. But upgraded. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So I'm thinking, by the time we get to Hurin and Morwen and Turin, and again, here I'm thinking of the early segments of the later children of Hurin, right? what we seem to see there is something like a mead hall culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a great hall. There's the Lord's Great Hall, right? In the center, Broda takes over the hall, right? When he comes in later on, the hall that gets burned down eventually, right? So I'm thinking that might be the kind of evolution of this as they get up there in the north and they kind of put down roots. They're still going to be like, I mean, they would have been nomadic in like, you know, clan groups and stuff like that before down in the south. They're still going to be in those groups. And they still even might wander, but they're going to have centers now. Like instead of the one center at Estelad where they all gathered, they're each going to have their great halls, because then, Nick, you also have like the forge, right, which is not going to move. And so you have the great hall, which doesn't move. Even if, you know, everybody doesn't have to necessarily live there in a town, but it would be, you know, the central place where everybody could go. And that's just kind of, I'm imagining like mead halls, something a little bit more like Rohirric culture, really, not exactly like Rohirric culture, but similar to it.
Yeah.
They're blonde, they have horses, and they have mead halls.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
right. We're pretty close.
We're very Rohirrim.
Yeah. The Rohirrim don't take after strangers. So yeah, that's, yes, exactly. Yeah. Okay. And the sign of leadership is the dragon helm, right? This is, we have the gifting of the dragon helm there at the end of episode 6. And this becomes really the symbol of Hador's status as peer of elven lords, right? Him kind of taking his place among the elven lords in a way which is very different from what we see any other human do. As much respect as Finrod has for Beor and Andreth, you know, Finrod became BFFs, or at least BF for a while, with BFs for as long as he could with humans. But it's not the same, right? The relationship, even with Finrod and Andreth or Barahir, is not the same as Fingon and Hador. You know, the way that Hador is really going to become one of his captains, and certainly what's his face? Rogren is going to basically kind of see Hador as like a fellow captain, right, under Fingon alongside him. And so that definitely puts him in a different place.
Right.
Yes. Hador's entire agreement with Fingon has the nature of a lord recruiting lesser lords for battles.
Right.
So that's been the basis of it all along, which means that Dorloman is independent and it's ruled by Hador and his descendants, but it's still very much a formal agreement with like a liege lord and all that sort of thing. It's not what we would view as independent.
Right. Yes, and to answer JJ's question, I do envision brigands drinking in the reek and brats rolling on the floor among the dogs in Dorloman. That's pretty much how they roll, I think, more or less. You know, I mean, looked at from a certain point of view, anyway. But yeah, no, I think you're right about Fingon's recruiting and like his mentality throughout that. I mean, that's definitely what I love the dragon helm as a symbol, right? And the differences there, right? The differences between the staff of Beor, the staff and the stole, as we had among, you know, the House of Bayor, which are both of them really connected to their own heritage, right? And they've passed through the elvish influence, right? But in the end, they have made the choice to like remain themselves and to continue forward in their own mission. And so their kind of symbols point to that, right? Haleth's symbols are about her own overcoming, right? You know, the spear from her father. So it's the link back to her father and her brother who are dead, but it's, you know, also the spear with which she has won her battles and the pelt of her foe that she has slain. here we have the gift of the elves, right? This special helm, which is, you know, a gift to the elves and then a gift from the elves. And that, it seems perfect, right? Not to mention, of course, obviously we know the future history of the dragon helm and its connection, you know, its previous connection to Glaurung and its future connection to Glaurung. But yeah, I think that works really nicely.
Yeah, obviously we didn't come up with that particular symbol of leadership. That was already in the story.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, no, we didn't invent that one. But sort of having it be one thing that was not necessarily obvious, by the way, I think is, I mean, if we are essentially treating the dragon helm almost like a crown, right? Like it is the crown of the Lord of Dorloman. That's not explicit in the book. Like it's explicit that he has it, right? And that he wears it into battle, or at least some of them do, right? Hurin doesn't, I guess. But I think Hurin has to have awesome hair, right? Like,
yeah, that's why.
That's why he doesn't want to wear it, right?
I mean, anyway, that's very common with actors as well.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, they don't like to wear helmets because it makes them, you know, not as attractive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's a little hard to act through something completely covering your face.
That's not it.
Obviously, there are stories where people do manage to act with a mask over their face for the entire time.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think I've seen one or two films like that. Yeah.
Yeah, Mandalorian. Yeah, that as Scott was just mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
There are definitely examples.
But anyway, yeah, no, it's understandable. So anyway, but mostly it's going to be like the crown of and that I think is cool. You know, that he would wear it, not only that Hador would wear it, not just in battle, but it would be like a regal, you know, piece of headgear, which of course is also very like the crown of Gondor, which is also a battle helm originally.
Right.
A slightly fancied up battle helm, and this battle helm is already sufficiently fancied up to serve as a crown, no question. Not to mention the fact that the impact of it, right? I mean, the kind of awe that the dragon helm inspires is also very much, you know, in line with the as like kind of a, you know, to put it on for the kind of effect that you would want to have as, you know, a sitting king, like wearing a crown, right? I mean, the purpose of the crown, you know, not to show off wealth, as crowns were so often designed to show off wealth, but really to show off both the connection with the elves, right? The connection with Fingon, and just authority, you know, just power. Which of course is usually what wealth meant when you had a fancy crown with lots of jewels on it. Yes. But this is a little bit more direct in its way, and not just quite like that. Okay. Other thoughts about the House of Hador? Other things that we need to focus on? Are they literate? Do we get writing here? They could learn it, obviously, from the elves.
Yeah.
I would think after they're settled in Dorloman, that would be something that develops in their culture. Among other things, they have contact with Ladros. So even if they don't learn it directly from the elves, they can learn it from the House of Bayor.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
The House of Haleth is only illiterate because they don't want to.
Yeah, by choice. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just part of the stubbornness of I mean, they want to keep their own traditions and their own traditions alive, and yes, yeah. They might even consider writing a newfangled elvish thing.
An elvish trick.
Exactly. Yeah, that they don't need any of that. Thank you. They are fine. They are perfectly fine with their traditions on their own. Yeah. Okay.
especially since it's a trick that is taught to the Beorians while they are pets of the elves in Nargothrond.
Right. Exactly. I'm really looking forward to that Endreth Haleth scene now. But
Yeah.
we'll get there. We'll get there soon. Speaking of soon, so next time, our next session is going to be on Thursday, May 6th. And we're going to talk about episode 7, right? So we're going to, we're going to get to the Great Council at Estelad, right? So we get Hador and the choice of the people of, we finally get to call them the people of Hador instead of just the Esteladers. And and then we also, of course, we're going to get Amlach and fake Amlach and all that. So, exciting times ahead here next time. And we didn't 100% finish episode 6 either. There's still a little bit of ground that we should probably tidy up before we, wasn't it frame? No, wait. We did the frame, and we were going to save talking about the frame for next time. Wasn't that what happened? We did everything but the frame, didn't we?
Something like that. Yeah, we did everything but the frame.
Yeah, so we can lump the frame together with future frame stories.
Right. Okay.
No problem.
Yeah, I thought we came pretty close to finishing episode.
We're essentially
6.
doing that with the script discussion for the next 2 episodes as well.
Okay.
Because we realized that we had a lot of a lot of stuff that we had to work into the frame over the next over episodes 11, 12, and 13, and we wanted to make sure that we knew how those episodes were going to feel before we made decisions like that. So
Yeah.
This is, of course, the Christmas festival, which leads to a coup, which leads to the death of the queen, and there's a bit of a rebellion going on with the sons, and we sort of need to hit all those points at the right spot.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Keep Sauron in Christmas. Right. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. Awesome. Very good. So thanks everybody.
Sauron is the reason for the season.
Sauron is the reason for the season. That's right. Oh, absolutely. I'm not sure whether I'm brave enough to do t-shirts about that. But anyway.
If you don't, I will.
I
have a Redbubble too.
I recommend coming up with what the actual Haradrim holiday is that celebrates Sauron, so we don't have to keep calling it Christmas.
No.
As soon as we call it whatever it is that's not Christmas, this will seem much less uncomfortable.
But if we just say is the reason for the season, then we don't have to worry about it. You see,
exactly.
Then we can be both funny and offensive while also being perfectly appropriately accurate to the storyline. Oh dear. Anyway.
Okay. You all have fun with this.
This is Marie slowly stepping aside and stepping out of the line of fire. Totally true. Absolutely. She is wiser than we, as always. Thank you everybody for joining us. And I will say, as always, thanks for listening and Godspeed.